Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Why the world chose a gold standard instead of a silver standard. Let's explore. We're going to be looking back in history and finding the benefits and drawbacks over the other, gold or silver, as I reference an article here by Ryan McAkin from ISIS. Among those who support the end of government fiat money, it's not uncommon to hear and see claims that gold is the best money or natural money, or the only substance that's really suited to be commodity money. In many of these cases, when they say gold, they mean gold and not silver, platinum, or any other precious metal. Naturally, one can expect to encounter these claims among those who have made a living out of promoting gold or gold-related investments for commercial purposes. Consider Nathan Lewis's 2020 article at Forbes titled "Gold Has Always Been the Best Money." He contends that gold and not silver is obviously the best money, that its adoption as the metal behind the 19th century gold standard was more or less inevitable and based off the alleged intrinsic superiority of gold as money. He writes, in the late 19th century, a final decision had to be made between gold and silver. People chose gold and silver, which had for thousands of years traded as a stable ratio with gold, has lost its monetary quality and became volatile. Lewis presents this is an event that was as natural as people choosing to ride in automobiles rather than on the backs of donkeys. Choosing gold over silver is progress, just like getting rid of the horse and buggy. Lewis insists that a final decision had to be made between gold and silver, and that people chose gold. That leaves a lot unsaid, to say the least. Why did this decision have to be made? Couldn't both metals serve as money? Moreover, who made the decision? Lewis says it was people who made the decision. Which people? The narrative around gold's inevitability as a dominant metallic money in the 19th century is an unfounded one. Gold's preeminence was never inevitable, inexorable, or based off of any sort of natural law of money. Rather, the rise of gold resulted from a number of historical events peculiar to a certain time and place. These include geopolitical issues, increasing global gold supply, political efforts to increase foreign trade, and the fixed exchange ratio between gold and silver. The marketplace was not necessarily the driving factor behind the turn to gold. Had it not been for the government meddling designed to control gold and the gold standard, we might still be living in a world of true currency competition today. A world of competition between gold, silver, and anything else that market actors might find to be useful as a general means of exchange. So the history of metallic money is largely a history of silver money. Going into the distant past, we find that silver coins were in continual use from the ancient world well into the 19th century. Gold coins were indeed used as stores of value and as money, but silver coins were the coins most often used because silver coins were more numerous and appropriate for ordinary daily transactions than were gold coins in most cases. Copper coins were also used and obviously a lot more abundant. Regimes certainly considered silver to be of strategic importance, and in the late 13th century, the Crown and Parliament in England together banned to export of silver bullion, including foreign silver coins, and plate from December 1278. This was a convenient way to prevent incoming foreign silver coins, which were numerous and widespread use in France, from leaving England again. It was noteworthy that when the wealthy Republic of Venice in the 12th century obtained one of the world's first government loans secured by tax revenues, the loan was denoted in silver marci. In the 16th century, Antwerp rose to become a financial center, as it facilitated markets where German copper and silver was traded for the spices that the Portuguese explorers brought back from India. Trade with the East, meanwhile, continued in silver, as the Chinese and Japanese had long preferred silver to exchange for the goods of the East. The use of silver was also facilitated by increasing abundance and a growing need for easy-to-use silver coinage. Silver mines were expanded in Central Europe by the wealthy Fugger family of Augsburg in the early 16th century. But of greater importance was massive imports of silver from Peru and Mexico in the 1550s and 1560s. A new silver mine was discovered in 1545 in Potosi. It's in Bolivia today, but this was followed by new discoveries in Mexico, where Luis Armando Hernandez notes a major new infusion of America's silver began in 1548 with the discovery of the silver mines in Zacatecas in Mexico. This new silver had a profound impact on the world economy beginning in 1600 and various trade exports in Asia. During the 16th century, European merchants and bankers engaged in a boisterous market of currency exchange and competition where money could be made on the arbitrage between regional preferences for either gold or silver. The de facto preference for silver continued for centuries, and as Hernandez concludes, silver's abundance and thus relatively low price made the money of regular commerce. Until the dawn of the 19th century, there was at least a tri-metallic world market. However, the predominant was a de facto silver standard. The more rapidly increasing world supply of silver and its concomitant decline in its relative price to gold and copper induced and permitted the silver standard increasingly to impose itself in the world market economy. But what happened in Britain is they went to a gold standard. An important first step is found that brought this to the end was Britain embracing the standard, and the efforts to create a national currencies defined as amounts of gold and silver. Murray N. Rothbard explains why this had occurred. The free market established parallel standards in the past of gold and silver, each freely fluctuating in relation to other in accordance with market supplies and demands. But governments decided they would help out the market by stepping in to simplify matters. In quotes, how much clearer things would be, they felt, if gold and silver were fixed at a definite ratio, say 20 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold. Then both monies could always circulate at a fixed ratio, and far more importantly, the government could finally rid itself of the burden of treating money by weight instead of by tale. Let us imagine a unit, the ruhr, defined by Ruhrtons as 1/20th of an ounce of gold. We have seen how vital it is for the governments to induce the public to regard the ruhr as an abstract unit of its own right, only loosely connected to gold. What better way of doing this than to fix the gold to silver ratio? Then ruhr becomes not only 1/20th of an ounce of gold, but also 1 ounce of silver. The precise meaning of the word ruhr, a name for gold weight, is now lost, and people begin to think of the ruhr, that's R-U-R, as something tangible in its own right, somehow set by the government for good and efficient purposes as equal to certain weights of both gold and silver. It was in this environment of fixed exchange ratios between gold and silver that an important second step towards the gold standard occurred. This was the accidental imposition of a gold standard in Britain in the 18th century. David Glasner explains the British state fixed the legal value of the gold guinea at 21.5 silver shillings. At this rate, thanks to a fixed gold to silver ratio, gold was overvalued, so that gold began flowing into England from abroad. Even after Sir Isaac Newton, master of the mint, effected a new currency reform in 1717, which reduced the value of the gold guinea to 21 silver shillings, the implied mint ratio of silver to gold of 15.21 to 1 still slightly overvalued gold, although it was not intended to do so. Newton reform confirmed a de facto gold standard in Britain. Wow. Meanwhile, new gold finds in Africa further enabled the mercantilist British state to hoard gold. And with most of the world on a silver standard, Britain's trading partners in Northern Europe were happy to exchange their gold for the British silver that continued to flow to the continent. Eventually, the British government discontinued free silver coinage in 1798 and adopted an exclusive de jure gold standard with 1816's Coinage Act. Moreover, after nearly a century of de facto gold standard, a status quo bias began to favor a continued gold standard in the United Kingdom even as the market realities changed. There were other practical factors that further encouraged the regime to stay on a monometallic gold standard as well. The adoption of the gold standard made it easier for the British state to address the nation's coin shortage. You've heard that before, a coin shortage. A shortage of coins had long been a problem throughout much of Europe, especially as industrialization led to more wage and work paid in cash. With the nation now on a gold standard, the British state could easily use silver or token coins. That is, silver could be used for coins whose metallic value was less than the face value. In England, these debased silver coins would not drive gold out of circulation in accordance with Gresham's law because silver had been demonetized. This proved to be popular, although there were some efforts in shifting to either bimetallicism or a silver standard in the 19th century. These voices were increasingly powerless politically. Even the fear of gold devaluation in the marketplace that came with new gold discoveries in both California in 1849 and Australia in 1851, due to increasing gold supply, was not enough to shift opinion against gold within Britain's regime. The importance of the British ideological embrace of gold can be seen in the fact that the gold rush in California had the opposite effect in much of Europe. The British state was determined to hold on to its gold, even if it looked like gold might lose ground against silver in terms of its market price, but many other regimes took steps to preserve their silver hoards instead. For example, governments in Belgium and Switzerland introduced the silver franc, and gold was demonetized in Naples, the Netherlands, Spain, and India. This was done to prevent outflows of silver that would presumably result from free coinage of the now more plentiful gold. Interesting. So why did the continent embrace the gold standard? At the middle of the 19th century, the gold standard in Europe was unfashionable, in the words of historian Ted Wilson. This would begin to change significantly by 1860, and by 1870, Western Europe made a decisive turn towards gold. The increasing importance of Britain as a global power and world-spanning trading partner played a big part in this. Governments and large merchants often preferred a monetary system that eased trade with their nation's largest trading partners. Increased trade with Britain influenced efforts to move towards a gold standard and away from silver in Northern Europe. In Germany, for example, economic ties to London prompted many interest groups, such as those in the financial and shipping sectors, to push for a gold standard. A similar story is found in other countries as well. In France, where silver had long been a preferred money for the central bank and for agricultural populations and populations in the provinces, gold began to gain favor, especially in regions where trade ties with Britain were most important. Yet there were many Europeans who were satisfied with bimetallicism and saw no need for an exclusive embrace of gold. This varied by both region and economic sector. In both France and elsewhere, agricultural interests and small business owners suspected they would not benefit from the proposed change. Making the switch to gold became a matter of winning a political debate, and the outcome of this debate remained dubious for years. When the switch to gold came, the verdict was hardly unanimous. Many influential voices prevailed in pushing for gold. However, in 1867, at the International Monetary Conference in Paris, Western governments adopted the 25 franc gold coin unit as a basis for eventually global gold standard. This is easier said than done, Both France and Germany still relied heavily on silver in their bimetallic systems, and it was no easy matter to retire silver and replace it with gold. The silver would need to be converted into gold at something approximately the fixed 15.5 to 1 ratio, and that required a lot of gold. The French regime had enough gold to seriously contemplate this plan, but Germany was far more reliant on silver. It was unclear where the German state and banking system would get enough gold to demonetize silver. According to Marc Flandreau, the key change came with the conclusion of the Franco-Prussian War. As stipulated by the Treaty of Frankfurt, France paid 5 billion francs to Germany after losing the war. This payment was in international bills, most of them convertible into gold. This suddenly changed the calculus in whether or not Germany could change over to a gold standard. Thanks to this new infusion of gold, Germany announced it was adopting the gold standard in 1871. At this point, the realities of international trade were pushing France, which remained on a bimetallic standard, and many smaller countries toward money that would facilitate easier trade with Britain, Germany, and the growing gold bloc overall. By 1873, France, Belgium, Italy, and Switzerland had embraced a de facto gold standard, which would be solidified in law in subsequent years. So there's this problem with bimetallicism. Moreover, the government invented fixed gold-silver exchange ratio would prove to be a key political factor. When first imposing this ratio, governments had generally embraced the market ratio, which tended to hover around 15.5 to 1. But in the second half of the 19th century, this ratio less and less reflected market demand and market prices. This laid the foundation for the ultimate abandonment of both gold and silver as money. Rothbard explains that while the fixed ratio did accomplish the government's goal of defining gold and silver in terms of national currencies, it did not, however, fulfill its other job of simplifying the nation's currency. For once, again, Gresham's law came into prominence. The government usually set the bimetallic ratio originally, say 20 to 1 at the going rate of the free market, but the market ratio, like all market prices, inevitably changes over time. As supply and demand conditions change, as changes occur, the fixed bimetallic ratio inevitably becomes obsolete. Europe and the Americas experienced volatile swings in both directions during the 19th century, as either silver or gold was overvalued in accordance with changes in supply. This fixed ratio induced problem led to what Rothbard describes as the calamitous effect of suddenly alternating metallic currencies. Naturally, many voices in the public called for the regime to solve this problem, which the regime had caused in the first place. Isn't that like what happens today? Government creates the problem and then wants to solve it. Bimetallism, according to Rothbard, created an impossibly difficult situation, which the governments could either meet by going back to a full monetary freedom, parallel standards, or by picking one of the two metals as money, gold or silver standard. Full monetary freedom, after all this time, was considered absurd and quixotic, and so the gold standard was generally adopted. Thus, during the 1870s, Europe's government decided gold was to be the metal. This became apparent the next time the bimetallic pendulum swung during the 1880s, and it was silver that was legally overvalued and thus would have pushed gold out of circulation even at the fixed exchange ratio. But that's not what happened. When silver supplies greatly increased in the 1880s, thanks to the newly discovered in-ground sources in North America, Western governments still, on a bimetallic standard, rejected the establishment exchange ratio. Instead, these regimes chose to gradually prohibit free coinage of silver. As it became clear that silver was going to be demonetized, the demand for silver fell further, pushing up demand for gold even more. At this point, silver was all but dead as a monetary standard in the West. And it goes on to say there's nothing natural about the triumph of gold. With the demise of silver, gold-supporting pundits and scholars immediately began to paint silver as somehow less civilized than gold, and the gold standard is a sign of progress. The reality, however, is that the monometallic gold standard was a result of historical circumstances, interest group pressures, and great power politics. It was not an inherent part of some alleged march towards progress or civilization. If the people chose gold as a sole metallic standard, it was because governments had created an unattainable situation with fixed exchange ratios. Moreover, the embrace by regimes of either gold standard or silver standard over time had led to a network's effects in international trade and induced governments to embrace the same standard as their trading partners. In all, we find no natural law or market law that points to gold as the best money within an unhampered market. Instead, we see fingerprints of government interventions everywhere. All this moved the world ever more towards a system in which the world's regimes gained even more control over defining, controlling, and manipulating currency. If a government could demonetize silver, it could demonetize gold as well. This is exactly what happened, and of course it's not a coincidence that in the era of state-imposed monometallic gold standard was followed by an era of Bretton Woods and fiat currencies. That's actually a very interesting piece here that I've just read verbatim, and I think it's fascinating. What was left out in this was some of the discoveries of silver in the Americas that they alluded to, but there was a lot of silver found in Nevada and in other areas, and obviously from the massive silver found in Peru, the Silver Mountain is one aspect of it, but also when you take into account what happened to this fight in the United States. There was a big fight for this bimetallic standard, and you may remember William Jennings Bryan, Cross of Gold speech, very famous speech by populist presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan. So those are the aspects and kind of where led to the history of it, but this admittedly is more relied on European history, but also America was very much a big part of that. And we saw what happened there, as the world moved to this gold standard. And of course, the moral of this story is that, why they chose gold over silver. What does it have to do with politics? But there's another thing, too, that the author left out, and that is no matter how much the ratio may change naturally by free market forces at play, one thing is for sure, gold is always rare and will always be more rare than silver. And also, one must come to understand that silver and gold as money, or being backed by money, or backing money as a standard, if people use currencies that are backed by the silver and gold, you have to store the silver somewhere. And there's a lot more silver to store than gold. And so therefore, it may become somewhat impractical to store all that silver to back up your silver certificates and notes in due course, because one thing also the author does not mention here is that silver greatly increased in production starting in just before 1900. And there's a lot more silver out there since 1900. In fact, I think the vast majority of the silver mined has been mined since the year 1900. And gold has increased as well too, but not nearly as much. The mining ratio between gold and silver is about 8 to 9 to 1, but that does not preclude the fact that the market forces now, based off the spot price of gold and silver, reflect a much different scenario, much different situation. Gold to silver ratio as it stands as I record this video is about 80 to 1, but certainly that has fluctuated between 80, 60, and there are times where it narrows when there's a big bull run on bull market for both gold and silver. The ratio tends to tighten and tighten dramatically. Last time we saw it tighten up, we saw it get down to about 33 to 1. Still over double what these ratios that I discussed in this video were. So I found this article quite interesting, and I wanted to share it with you all. I think the overall moral to this story is that gold and silver are not immune from being corrupted, and they have been when they were used as money. And so, therefore, anytime man gets involved, anything with related to any object or any system or policy, it can be corrupted It can be influenced, and so forth. The metals themselves have no agenda. Therefore, I think it's a good idea to hold them because they will always have value, no matter what kind of standard there was, no matter what there will be in the future, no matter what. Even if we're obviously going to be transitioning into new type of currencies, more likely backed more and more by the blockchain, by some sort of digital ledger system. But that does not mean that these metals do not have value. They will always be valued. And we know this because central banks, well, they continue to store gold. They don't store silver because it's impractical. But there's maybe other reasons too, because a lot of it is in demand for industrial uses. So there you have it. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Hope you found this interesting. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.